and welcome to the Fortean Winds podcast. I am your host, RamX, and I am here with Dr. Bruce Solheim.
Hello.
And today on the show, we're stepping into a world where the lines blur between history, the military, and the metaphysical. Our guest is someone who's worn many hats: a U.S. Army veteran, a Fulbright scholar, a college professor, a playwright, a comic book creator, and perhaps most relevant, a lifelong experiencer of the paranormal. Dr. Bruce Solheim is a professor of history at Citrus College in California with a PhD in U.S. foreign policy and a storied background that includes service as a jail guard in West Germany and a helicopter pilot in the 82nd Airborne. Dr. Solheim has had extraordinary experiences with what many would call the unseen: ghosts, angels, demons, telepathy, psychokinesis, and yes, extraterrestrials. These aren't just passing encounters. In fact, he's chronicled decades of them in his Timeless trilogy, a series of books that dive deep into his contact with other realms. Central to these experiences is a being he calls Anzar, an ancient alien mystic with whom Dr. Solheim claims to be in weekly contact. Through these meditative spirit walks, Anzar has shared messages about the future, the nature of reality, and what he describes as a quantum nexus, a place where the spiritual, alien, and quantum worlds all converge. Welcome, Dr. Bruce.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ram, for inviting me. And through our mutual friend, Lucy, who's a great person. And I hope my interviews is as good as hers, because I thought it was great what you did.
Oh, that's very kind. Yeah. You're referring to Lucinda Morel, who was on our UFOs and Mediums episode. And that was a great episode. Mm-hmm. And that's a good jumping off point because I find Lucinda very credible. Mm-hmm. And that entire group of experiencers that you're connected with and the processes, I think have been well documented. So I look forward to diving into it with you a little more today.
Sure. Yeah.
And now that we're interviewing experiencers regularly, I usually like to start out with where your first experiences started. You're a lifelong experiencer, so I think our audience is getting a little familiar with the difference between a lifelong experiencer and a random encounter.
Yeah, it becomes a lifestyle, I guess. Goes all the way back to when I was 4. In Norway, in northern Norway, 200 miles above the Arctic Circle, where my parents are from. We were staying with my grandmother, and I had a miraculous healing experience that, in my four-year-old way of understanding, my parents told me, my grandmother told me it was a guardian angel that saved me. And it was the winter time in northern Norway, no hospitals, no doctors on the island. The only way on or off is by airplane or by boat. And so some of my relatives thought I was going to die. I had very high fever, couldn't move my limbs, my head. I couldn't move. I was very, very sick and in this little bed in my grandmother's kitchen. And everybody was worried. I was scared. I was crying. But then everybody left the kitchen, and I saw this bright light in the ceiling in this old country kitchen in this home that I still own in northern Norway. Nobody lives there now, but in fact, it's very haunted. But anyway, that's another story. But I saw this light, and when I saw it, it made me feel very comfortable. I didn't see necessarily a figure or anything, but it was just warm. It was comforting, and I knew everything was going to be okay. I fell asleep. And then I woke up a little while later. My grandmother, my mother were there, and I got up. I saw them. I got up. I ran around. I was perfectly fine. I don't know what the time, maybe a couple hours, whatever. And they said, it's a miracle. And I said, oh, okay. And I told them I saw this bright light up in the ceiling, and now I feel better. And they said, well, that was your guardian angel. So I said, okay, all right. At 4 years old, what are you going to say? It's like, okay, I believe it. I didn't know what it was.
You believe them, but now did you think that, in retrospect, do you think that they knew that this was genuinely paranormal?
I know my mother did. My grandmother was very religious, but not necessarily. I don't know if she had any paranormal experiences, although she has reached out and touched me physically while I was in her house after she passed away. So after her death, yes, she has contacted me. My mother was very psychic, so it was very natural for her. So we had a natural connection that my father did not share because he was afraid of that stuff. So
that stuff.
Yeah, he was. I mean, he was in a Nazi labor.
You're in a safe space.
Yeah,
you don't have to call
he
it
was.
that
He
stuff.
was afraid of anything, paranormal. He was a very practical man. He was a fisherman in Alaska, like the deadliest catch kind of guy, and was in a Nazi labor camp during the war. He was a very brave, strong man, but man, he did not like. When my mom and I would practice reading each other's minds with cards, just playing cards, he said, put it away. I don't like that. So we would have to comply. Okay. But my mom would always wink at me like, okay, well, to be continued, So she was
So you had a couple other, I think, key experiences that I've heard you talk about before.
Yeah.
And there was one in particular where you were saved from a really bad situation.
Yeah, a child molester. Yeah, that's So I was. Let's see. This was 64. Yeah, so I was 6 years old. Okay. The people that lived above us, and we lived very close to a Nike missile site. So that's always weird stuff that happens, and with experiencers anyway. And so the people that lived above us, they were also Norwegian Americans, but they used to babysit me. And the husband, the father, was very strange. He acted like a child, and even at 6, I knew there was something wrong with this guy. And I'm not going to go into the details of what he was doing, but he was doing very weird things. Luckily, I was never, molested or anything, but I knew there was something weird about this guy, and. So then I had this vision, and my bedroom window faced their house kind of up on the hill. And in the backyard, I had this vision of this very tall, what I now know is Anzar, actually. I didn't know at the time. I just knew it was somebody that looked scary, like a monster. That's what I thought it was, a monster. And he was like a holographic image. And he communicated to me telepathically and said, don't go to that house anymore. And I said, why should I? I remember thinking, why should I believe you? You're a monster, and I'm not supposed to believe monsters. And he told me, he said, I might look like a monster to you, but that man up there is the real monster. So it was a lesson, too. It's like, the old can't judge a book by its cover, because the guy looked like a normal dad, but he was obviously sick and twisted. And so I didn't go up there anymore. And I did ask, I said, well, what about my mom? Because she sends me up there to be, for babysitting. And he said, don't worry about it. You won't have to worry about it. She'll understand. So I don't know if he talked to her or, whatever, she just understood. But I never went up there again. And the other thing about that encounter was that he showed me like a ship, like a spaceship. And I was fascinated by space already when I was 6. I had, it was the beginning of the whole space program thing, early 60s. And I had like a spaceship lamp, in my bedroom. And he showed me this ship. There were other kids in this holographic image that I didn't recognize, but I think they were also being shown simultaneously. So I said, well, man, I really want to be an astronaut. And he said, well, you will fly, and I did. I ended up being a pilot in the Army, not a spacecraft, but a helicopter, but nonetheless. So
that was a very formative experience.
It was, and it made me, and I already had invisible playmates, well, invisible to other people, maybe not my mom. But I would, I remember getting in trouble in kindergarten, talking to the class about my 2 invisible playmates, and my teacher said, that's very nice, you have a good imagination, but it's not real. And she said, don't ever say that like it's real. You can pretend or whatever, that's fine. And so I told my mom, I was very upset when I got home. My mom said, you have to understand, sometimes it's okay to talk about this, but you have to realize who you're talking to. And you might have to not always be so, not honest, but so forthcoming, basically that.
She was trying to teach you discernment.
Teach you how to deal with it. Yes, discernment,
right.
exactly.
So in regard to the NHI,
yeah.
or in this case that you would come to know as Anzar,
right.
engaging in an intervention.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that I have seen and heard before. For example, Joe McMoneagle, when he was saying that they were looking for recruits into one of the government psychic programs,
right.
one thing that they would look for was people who had survived impossible odds or escaped an unusual encounter where they were the only ones that got out. And it was often because something told them. Sometimes they were clairaudient. Sometimes there was a visual apparition, like in your case. But that's a consistent thing that the government is looking for. What do you think about that?
Well, yes, and I can tell you just a few years after that, it was in a place called Deception Pass, which is on Whidbey Island, kind of the mainland and Whidbey Island in Washington State. And there's this very steep center part between two bridges. They call it Pass Island. And in the early 60s, there weren't any guardrails anywhere. People were just supposed to be careful. So I was running like a wild man on these trails and came to this cliff, and I was running straight for the cliff, and I ran off the cliff. I know that I ran off the cliff, but something grabbed me. Now, I thought it was my dad at first. That was the memory I had, was my dad grabbed me by the scruff, and pulled me back. And I thought, oh, my dad's a hero. He made sure I didn't fall off. But now, as I think about it, it was something beyond that. And I think it was also Anzar. And there's been other interventions too, and what I call rescue operations. But I think there is a special purpose. I genetically got this already predisposed for this, and I think there was some training. I think there's experiences, and that was a near-death experience. Basically, is what you would not.
So that's great. You just said a whole lot in about 5 seconds. So I want to unpack that a little bit.
Right.
I think our audience is on board with you already. If they're all caught up on a lot of this. So yes, why don't you start at what you said about being genetically predisposed, because I think you're helping us confirm that.
Yeah. So my mom was very psychic. She was the one who taught me how to do telepathy. She's not a professional psychic. She was an artist and a homemaker,
Right.
Her mother was a healer and a traditional herbalist in Norway, in that northern Norwegian island where there was no doctors. So that it was a very necessary thing and a very practical thing when you think. It's not really mystical. It was really so accepted by the people of northern Norway who believe in trolls and all this kind of stuff. So it's just natural.
I think this is going to come up later as we discuss the Nazis and the occult.
Yes.
But what I think I'm looking for from you is, you can say whatever you want. The nature of my question is more about the fact that there are certain experiencers like yourself who are genetically predisposed, and that leads them to a lifelong of contact. And there's a lot of people out there who would never come forward.
Right.
And what led you to finally go public with these experiences, specifically contact with Anzar?
Yeah. So I lived most of my life without really talking to very many people, or not publicly, obviously, for various reasons. I had security clearances. I worked as a defense contractor in the Army. Academics, that's not a good place to be telling people you talk to dead people, and be taken seriously and get tenure. So it was in 2016, after, a life, all these experiences, continual experiences, that my dear friend that I grew up with, also Norwegian American, passed away. And a month after he died, he came to me in a vision. And the vision, when I say vision, it's kind of like that holographic kind of thing, not like you and I are seeing each other right now, but more of a holographic image, but very real and interactive, intelligent, not like a tape loop, but like it was my friend Gene. And I always mention his last name too, Thorkelson, because he was an actor. So he wants credit, right? So he came to me in this vision and he said, Bruce, it's time. Time for what? Time to tell your stories. And I said, well, I was apprehensive about it. He said, no, it's time. And speaking of time, where I am, there is no time as you conceive it. And I said, well, okay, I think I understand. He said, there's no past, there's no future. It's all just happening all at the same time right now. And he said, you should call your book that you're going to write Timeless. So I did. Not only did I write one book, but I wrote 3. And the reason I did a trilogy is because I started off kind of slow with just kind of more traditional paranormal stuff, and then got weirder and weirder, thinking, okay, I dipped my toes in. And so that was it. That's what prompted it, was Gene. So I always have to give credit to him. And
just to pause for a second.
Yeah.
And just to compare that for a second to the government disclosure.
Right.
And the way you said you had to start with dipping your toe in the paranormal, and then by the end you're going with full-on messages from Anzar.
Right.
And I think with Fortean Winds, we started with, oh wow, UFOs are real, and we're going to be talking about the same things you're talking about in the episode. So it's just different paths up the mountain, right? But they all led us to the same destination. So the way you just mentioned, rolling out the truth about paranormal and UAP information. Do you think that that's what the government is doing right now?
I think part of the government realizes that they, I guess they call it metering, just let a little bit out at a time. You don't want to let the dam burst, and then, potential devastation. So, yeah, I just wanted to test the waters, and nothing happened. People were interested. My colleagues didn't banish me from the college. I didn't get fired. People didn't think there were a couple people thought I was crazy, but there's always, people that think that out of fear or whatever. But when I published, the little comments, then I said, okay, I'll go a little bit further, and revealed a little bit more, started to introduce the extraterrestrial kind of stuff. And then the third book I call Timeless Trinity, it just talked about Anzar. And then after that was an independent book just about Anzar. And then after that, we are the aliens. It's like, okay, whoa, we are. Okay, so that's where we ended up. And and the whole time building the framework which you mentioned earlier, this idea of a nexus, of a quantum nexus, and that all these worlds are really the same. And so that's how I did it. And I think there are those in the government that would like to do it in that kind of methodical approach. Others, I think, want to just let it out. Others want to gatekeep. They want to, because the reason, I think, is because of if you're going to say UFOs are real, then you have to say, well, how can they navigate the way they do if there's a living entity inside?
Yes.
Well, there has to be some kind of psychic control of it. It can't be just, people with steering wheel or something crazy like that. Or
the government is well aware that if they admit UFOs are real, it is letting people know that they live in a much greater reality, where our normal physics don't hold up, and it makes things feel like it's really unexplained and mysterious, and they're afraid that people can't handle that. Yeah. Just by saying UFOs are real.
It's a shock. And then you also have to go to, well, then telepathy's real, and then psychokinesis is real, and then all of a sudden you're worrying, do my neighbors know what I'm thinking? Or can they make my stove come on and burn my house? Something terrible like that.
Sure. There would be paranoia. Yes. There would be, and I think that those are the things that keep it suppressed. There's also, I think there would be a loss of motivation. Yeah. At first, there would be a loss of purpose. There would be a loss of identity. Yeah. And that's what's in a number of the studies. That was in a RAND study that I'm pulling that from, that they were worried about it destroying productivity. So I think
as
that
they
those
said,
are the reasons.
I think there was
Yeah.
one government study that said it would be a threat to the body politic.
That's a good way to put
Yeah,
it.
threat to the body politic. And they have to maintain control, right? The government has to maintain control. And if you start saying, oh, yeah, flying saucers, telepathy, I mean, everything's out there. And now the government has to worry, well, because they've been using remote viewing, which is a good segue later if we want to talk
Right.
about my experience with that. If they admit that that's real, which they did with Stargate, if people can turn their gaze on foreign enemies, can't they also turn their gaze at our own leaders, what they're up to? And then oh my gosh, we can't allow that, so
Right.
there's a lot of paranoia, as you said. And, when do we lose control of this thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there would be a hump that society would have to get over. And those of us on our side are saying, let's just get over the hump so that we can start learning how this can help us and move forward.
Yeah.
But given that, I think we're once again telling the public not to expect too much from disclosure and to be very critical of what comes forward in the process of disclosure. If it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is.
I think that's wise advice. I'm still skeptical of things. I mean, if I hear something I've never heard before and it sounds sensational, I'm thinking, well, that's really interesting. Let me look into it. But I have a natural skepticism, which is very healthy for people, so they don't go into shock or just knee-jerk reactions to everything that's happening and get taken in by charlatans, which there are plenty of those people out there in the UFO world and the paranormal world. And, so you have to be very careful. And that's why I like the word revelation. And actually, I didn't make it up. It's an old word, but biblical even. But the Anzar uses the word revelation rather than disclosure, because he pointed out to me, he said, disclosure is other directed. It's like we're waiting here patiently while the government drips and drabs things to us. Or should we just understand from within, so it's revealed from within what the truth is? As I often tell my CERO friends, Lucy and others who are part of Close Encounter Resource Organization, headed by Yvonne Smith, I say, we know what the truth is because we've been exposed to it. So it's been revealed, it's already there, it's internal. And then you just have to practice discernment, like you said, because not everything is magical,
Right.
And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It's not like everything is all, you can't connect all the dots, you have to be careful. And it's hard to do that because once you accept something miraculous is real, then it's kind of it opens you up to other miraculous things, and you have to be careful.
You have to allow your old paradigms to die in order for you to be able to see what's in front of you.
Right.
But there's a grieving process when those old paradigms die. And as far as disclosure goes, that's why it's being held back. So over the course of our history at Fortean Winds, we took our audience all the way from UFOs are real to where we are right now. And we're going to talk about, Anzar and the quantum nexus. So that was disclosure in my mind. Like, we gave you the best we could do in the public. It brought you here and told you how we got here with a skeptical mindset and data driven, and then documented the whole thing. And I think we did that so that the public doesn't have to waste their lives on years of research. And they don't have to spend all their time on forums and comment sections, begging for answers that they're not going to get from the government. Right. I think you're giving them the answers, but they're mysterious. And that means discovery is out there, right?
Yeah, it's like any kind of skill set, playing the guitar. You can sit there and look at chord charts and everything, but until you get that muscle memory, it's going to be very, very difficult, and actually the practical experience. So, getting over the hump, like you said, the ontological shock, the initial shock, which everybody would have, you just get used to it, and then you get the muscle memory, whether it's, not actual physical muscles, but your understanding of what's going on. And then it becomes part of your daily life. And then you start becoming the real natural people that I think ancient people were, using their insights and their ability to their instincts, or whatever we used to call them, to keep us safe and to discern things that are real and not real. And I think that's something that we've gotten away from because we relied too much on the
material.
The material world, and haven't understood how it all connects, which is the quantum nexus. So,
right.
Yeah.
So in order to that's a good way to dive in, and maybe we can go into the quantum nexus this way, is in order to communicate with Anzar and your other spirit guides, could you guide us through the process that you take?
Yeah. So prior to 2016, after, Gene came to me in that vision, I had frequent paranormal experiences. I mean, frequent. Everything under the sun, paranormal. But they were random. I didn't have like any kind of management of it. I never used the word control because I think that's pretty presumptuous of us nobody's really controlling all this stuff. At least we are not doing that. But we can have a management system. And so I decided I'm going to start taking these, what I call spirit walks. At first I thought, well, I'll just do, like a Zen Buddhist or something, sit in. I can't do the lotus position. So that's out. So I tried sitting, and I got sleepy. So I have to keep moving. As you see, I always moving my hands. So I started walking and getting into a meditative state and then connecting. And that's how I did it. And I used different, like precursors to it. Like I grew up in the Lutheran church, so I protect myself, but it's more of a universal kind of thing, protection. And I rely on a couple of different guides that have been with me my whole life.
Can you describe your protection ritual a little more?
Yeah, I'll say, this is where it gets kind of funny, I guess, in a way. I will say, I would like to, I have two protective guides. I call Theodora and Ozzy. And Theodora is kind of an angelic figure, kind of female, or leaning towards the female energy, kind of angelic kind of feel to her. And Ozzy is a very kind of an older Native American looking, stern-faced, doesn't talk. He's like a bouncer. He's like a guy that you would, okay, I'm not going to mess with that guy. And those are the two. And I asked them to help me to rise up to the highest level of consciousness or vibration that I could, whatever term you want to use. I use both of them. So that I can
So you're in a meditative state.
Yes, I'm getting into that preparing myself, rising up, because to get there, you have to go up and they have to come down a little bit and meet halfway, and that's how you do it. And sometimes it's kind of shaky, the connection, but that's how you do it. And so I ask for protection. I appeal to God for protection. I also throw in, because I'm an old Star Trek original fan, I always ask for an opening of the communication channels through Commander Uhura. I really liked her. She was probably my first crush. She was just an incredible woman. But and
that's very interesting.
Yeah, so
because these are like very personal to you.
Yes, I use all that, and people not knowing that would say, "Oh, that's kind of silly." But you know what? It doesn't matter. Whatever your deal is, that means something to you. That's what I would use, whatever tradition or whatever. So what
that reminds me of real quick is the occult. And this is what a magician would say about creating a sigil. And or in transcendental meditation, it's creating a mantra. But it's kind of the same thing, isn't it? You created a symbol. You passed your intent into the symbol. And then you sort of, in my mind, I think of this as a computer programmer. So I say you created a call into the system.
That's what it is. And then the connection. I also thank my relatives, my mom and dad, my grandmothers and grandfathers, and my siblings are all gone. I'm the last one in my immediate family. They're all gone. So I just say hello to them. I talk to Anzar. I say hello, Anzar. and there's a couple of others there too that I asked to speak to. And I said I'd like to communicate with those that are friendly and with good intentions in the quantum nexus, what I call my star family and my spirit family. Those that have already been vetted, because when I first started doing it, I didn't use that protection as much. I just, okay, who wants to talk to me? And it's like there was a swarm of entities that came at me. Some of them were fine, and some of them were more malevolent. And I said, whoa, this is not good. Okay, go away. I'm shut down. I'm closed for business. We got to do this in a different way. So I learned very quickly that that's just not the way to do it. So you have to be very specific who you invite.
Don't just raise your hand and say, who wants to talk to me?
Yeah, I don't want to exclude new people, but I just want to make sure they're vetted. So that's kind of a protection that I do. And then I say, is there anything, things going on? What can you tell me that I could prepare for? And Anzar always says, well, I can give you an idea of what's going on right now and what things are heading. But remember, he says, predictions can be wrong, but preparations are never wrong. So here you go. And then he'll list a bunch of things, and some of them are pretty way out there. I mean, hard to kind of understand. Other things are more practical.
And sometimes Anzar is giving you predictions, right?
Yes, and he likes to call them preparations, because it depends on which time. It gets kind of confusing, but which timeline you end up in, because of the randomness. You don't know where the
butterfly effect is going to take you.
You don't know which one you're going to be in. So what could be an accurate prediction in one timeline could be totally inaccurate in another, or partially inaccurate. So you have to be very careful. But preparations are always good because of, and sometimes he'll give me odds. He'll say, well, there's a pretty 90% chance that it's going to be this. This is the predominant timeline you're probably going to end up on. So, but even then, there's a 10% chance that it won't be. So you have to be very careful and discerning, like you mentioned before. And then I ask questions as well, or I can have very specific things. Maybe people have asked me, can you help? I have a friend of mine, I can't mention his name, but and this is where it gets very practical and the government involved. He works for an agency. I'm not going to say which agency. He's actually a contractor to an agency, and you know what I mean by an agency. And he said, yeah, we're trying to find out where this guy is. Can you help us? And I said, sure, I'll ask. And then I found out where this person was, what their condition was. This was through Anzar. It's not just me. It's like all my spirit family, star family. I said, okay, where is this guy? What does it look like? What's his condition? And I'm given very specific information. I record it on my phone because oddly enough, when I get home, if I don't record everything that I'm hearing or seeing, I'll forget it. It's like I'm in a meditative state, so I don't remember everything. So I'll come back and I'll transcribe it. And then in this case, I had a very specific request from my friend. I sent it off to him. It turned out it was exactly what he was looking for. And a few days later, it was in the news where this person was and their condition, and it was exactly what Anzar told me. Now, the reason for that is because it was real time. That's remote viewing, rather than remote viewing the future, which is unpredictable or harder to predict, like I've said. So it was real time, and I had a very strong connection.
But Anzar was remote viewing, and you were channeling.
It's what I call assisted remote viewing. I'm connecting to him who's telling me what's going on right now. And as long as there's no breakdown in communication between me and Anzar, because sometimes it's like an old radio tuning it in. Sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes it's kind of, you can't quite make it out. So you have to fill in the gaps. But you can't fill in the gaps too much, because then you have in remote viewing, what they call analytical overlay, where your imagination or other things are entering in. It's like what you want to happen rather than what's actually happening.
Or what you think is going to happen.
Yes, so you second guess yourself. And that's why it's so hard to do anything about your personal, stuff, because it's too close, or your family or something you really care about. It's really hard So
just offhanded, I have to ask,
yeah.
because this has been coming up lately in our research as a question. Do you think Anzar has ever led you to more material wealth?
I've never, oddly enough, I've never asked for that. And there's a reason for that. I feel it's a sacred thing. And maybe this is the Norwegian in me, because Norwegians are we're taught to be very humble and to be very, don't stick your head up above anybody else. It's what they call janteloven, which means it's not a rule, necessarily, not like a law. It's like, don't think that you're more special than anybody else. So I feel like if I start asking for material wealth, it might work, it might not, but there'll probably be some repercussions for that. I got it. If it's natural, like, something that you're helping others, and as a result, something good happens, good fortune. And it was actually a Native American who emphasized this for me too. He asked me, Phil Red Eagle is his name, Ogallala Sioux. He, Vietnam vet, wonderful guy, talented writer. He asked me, what define good luck? And I said, well, it's when you get something unexpectedly that's really good fortune, And he said, that's not the way my people look at it. And I said, well, how do you look at it? How do you look at it? And he said, when you get an opportunity to help somebody and you can do it, that's good luck. And I thought, wow, that's a very humbling thing. It's like a different concept than the Western concept of I'm going to get something for myself.
It speaks to their very basic intent and our
yes,
very
the intention. The intention is very important. The intention is to enrich myself. It may happen, it may not. But then it sets into motion always asking. So even though I do ask for things, it's usually things that are helping other people that would make me feel good, that, for them and for all of us, kind of a thing. So it's kind of a combined Native American and Norwegian kind of thing. And also why when people ask me to connect with their dead relatives, I never ask for money. They've offered me money. I said, no, I don't, because it's not always correct. And
right.
And there's no way to be 100% correct. And anybody that says they're 100% correct, there's something going on there, something fishy. So, and I don't want to make up stuff to make them happy, because sometimes you ask and you don't get a connection, and then you took somebody's money, and then you're going to say, oh, well, I didn't get a connection. Oh, give me my money back, or,
I love that. It falls right into the Fortean Winds ethical guidelines,
yes,
unfortunately, of the poor paranormal researchers of the world.
You have to just be, it's a very honest undertaking. And anyway, so that's, yes, I could ask for that, and I could ask for a lot of things, whatever kind of greedy thing might come to mind, it's like, oh, if I was single, I obviously married, but, oh, well, I want this person to fall in love with me or whatever, and I'm thinking, that's against their will. If they want to, they will. And if you're trying to put some kind of, whammy on them to get them to do, that's not real. It's not.
That's manipulative.
It's manipulative.
Some would say evil.
Exactly. And the scary thing is that yes, it can be done, and it's done all the time. People do that all the time. They can, they can use that kind of manipulation, use their abilities to do that kind of stuff. And
what do you think they could do?
I think it's all the way up to, it could be as simple as bringing wealth to yourself, even if it sacrifices from somebody else, to cause misfortune for somebody else, even minor misfortune, up to injury and even death. I think it can get that serious, that you could wish death on somebody and cause them to great harm. And of course, that I think that it depends on the power of your intention and the power of your intention and attention to it. If you devote yourself to evil pursuits, you'll probably accomplish a lot of evil things. There's proof of that every day with, what people do. And
sure, and if you're aided by spirit guides,
yes,
you're just that much more powerful.
Yeah.
So
I think that that's why I always say you have to have a sense of morality and ethics, wherever that comes from. Because if you don't, you're going to destroy yourself. I look at somebody like probably the most powerful PK guy, psychokinetic guy, was the guy that Jeffrey Mishlove researched for like 10 years. Oh man, what's his name? It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, he wrote the book, The PK Man, Jeffrey Mishlove, who's a friend of mine. And that guy destroyed himself. He could make lightning come. I mean, he had this incredible macro PK ability that was documented by Jeffrey and others. But he was miserable, and people.
Jeffrey Mishlove is a great source.
Yeah,
for our audience.
Yeah, he is a very cool guy, and anyway, so there are lessons out there, Shakespearean, lessons, for what can happen. So you have to be very careful. That's why I always tell people who are starting off, it's better to learn how to turn it off before you learn how to turn it on, because you could learn how to turn it on pretty easily, and then you get caught up in all kinds of weird stuff. You got to know when to turn it off, because it's not always appropriate to.
And who and what to believe, right? That's where the discernment comes in.
Yeah, and it's very difficult. And I don't. I've often said that I don't want people to look at me as some kind of guru or some kind of no. That's I'm just a regular guy that It's like some people. The best way I can explain it is in baseball terms. I love baseball. Everybody can throw a ball, pretty much. Everybody can throw a ball. Some people can throw it 90 miles an hour. They're in the major leagues, So, yes, you could develop this skill, and that comes with a responsibility as well. But everybody has some degree of it. So learning how to use it effectively and for good is the trick. And that's why, I have my friend Dean Radin, who's the chief scientist for IONS. I don't know if you've talked to him, but he's a really good guy, and he wrote a book called Real Magic, and really interesting information in there. But one of the things he says is, yes, you can cause harm to other people. Yes, you can do this, force people to do things against their will. But I'm warning you. He says it in the book, I'm warning you not to do it. But there are people that don't take that warning. And
I find that so interesting. Yeah. We've given that warning.
Yeah.
And it's not like I knew that anywhere else other than instinctively.
Yes.
And then it was constantly reinforced in the lore.
Yes. Yeah.
That type of exchange, of self-interested exchange, would require a cost.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really, to put it in those terms, exchange. It is an exchange. If you use that power to do this, you are exchanging something of yourself. And it's kind of like in wartime, the Native Americans call it soul loss, the loss of soul. And they have to rebuild that through sweat lodge ceremonies and everything else. When we send our young soldiers to war, they come home and then we say, what's wrong with them? And then we give them medication or counseling. And it's more of a metaphysical thing. We should be putting people in sweat lodges. I myself have PTSD from my military experiences, and it's taken me a long time to figure out how to deal with that. And because modern society is not very good at dealing with what Native Americans knew, which was soul loss. So they do this rebirth ceremony in the sweat lodge, which I would love to do someday. I've never done a sweat lodge. I've done other kinds of stuff to help me, but So there is a price to be paid for sure, and remote viewing, what the government does, they still do it obviously, and I got a story about that other than what I already told you. But my friend, who was one of the original Stargate people, Lynn Buchanan, I talked to him for a while. Great guy. He quit working for the government doing RV after information that he got led to the death of a bunch of children that were killed in a missile attack. And he knew right where to go, but he didn't pick up the children were there. And then later it was collateral damage. And he said, that's it, I'm out. I'm not going to do this anymore. He felt like he was being deceived. And he said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't think you are good people that are directing this. And I'm going to instead focus my energies on helping people find missing children. So that's what he does. And he works for the police. He teaches people RV.
That's a lot safer than trusting a bunch of mysterious, rich, and powerful people's intent.
And you don't know who they are. My experience, other than my friend, who I knew who he was, and it was a limited kind of thing. There wasn't any kind of missile strike or anything, but my other experience where I wanted to help with a current situation, I offered my services, and I was invited to do it. And they don't give you any feedback, nothing. They just go silent. That's my experience, is like they'll use you. And that's, I understand that. That's the nature of their business or whatever. But you could easily get sucked into, all of a sudden, we want you to look at this, coordinate or this particular thing we have in mind. And then you find out what's going on. And then you find out later, oh, something terrible happened. Something went wrong.
So it's funny that you say that, because I am not a channeler or a medium, but when it comes to digital stuff, I can be.
Yeah.
And that's my skills are mostly, related to this type of open source analysis.
Yes.
That I would be asked for.
Yeah.
And it's always been the same too, is I provide the information and I never hear anything back.
You don't know.
And I will only do it if I'm absolutely certain that it's like a crime or something like that.
And I don't do it for money either, because when it comes, it's the same thing with the other thing, but the dead relatives and stuff. So as a service to humanity, that's what this is for, is a service to humanity, to make us better and to get us further up the, to move on the evolutionary scale, to try to get better. And but as a retired FBI friend of mine said, a lot of the people that he knew in government that were interested in UAPs and UFOs just want to figure out how to strap a bomb to it. It's that simplistic. It's like, man, we're still apes, with clubs, or something, come on.
Yes.
That's not what it's about, and that's, Anzar has told me that this technology, this advanced technology and the wisdom is for the benefit of all, not for the strategic advantage of the few. That's the way he put it, which I fully believe in. And a lot of the people I know in the group I'm in, and, whether it's Lucy or Terry Lovelace,
well, this technology gets gifted to us.
Yeah.
And even the NASA people are calling it donations.
Yep.
They realize that. But then the intent of the technology is unknown. But the intent of the technology is based on our intent.
Yeah.
If they gave us something that can provide zero energy, if they gave us something that could provide us 0 point energy or destroy the world, that would be up to us.
Right.
But I think we'd all be afraid that we're going to destroy the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we shouldn't expect that type of technology to come from the government.
Right. And, the fact that Anzar told me that the technology we do get from them can't be used to harm anyone, so which is kind of, if we've spent the last 70 years trying to figure out how to strap a bomb to it, we're not going to ever figure that out, because it's not going to work. That's not what it's for. And let's just hypothetically say, because it falls into it, that's medical technology. Right.
And we're not getting access to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of a scary thought.
Yep.
Now, how would you describe briefly the quantum nexus?
The quantum nexus, in the easiest way, and I'm not a scientist, I'm a historian, storyteller, writer, an experiencer. So the way I understand it is that and I love physics and I love quantum physics, and I've tried to understand it, and I know that it's kind of hard to understand. It's very difficult to understand for anybody. Even quantum scientists have troubles with it. But this idea of the quantum world, the spirit world, and the alien world, or NHI world, is really all just the same thing. It's what my friend Gene said, that there is no time in the sense that we sense it. There is no past and future. It's all happening at the same time. And so that is my understanding of what I call the quantum nexus, and other people call it that too. And so like one day
consciousness would be an interface with that quantum nexus.
Right. Right. That's exactly. It's like you were talking about computers. Our keyboards or even voice input, output, whatever, is all just an interface to the inner workings of the computer, which is really voltages toggling on and off. So we don't see the quantum nature of it. We just see our interface. And then when we catch glimpses of what's going on, we're amazed. It's like, well, there's entities passing through walls, there's UFOs, there's whatever, or ghosts, or Gene talking to me after he's dead, that kind of stuff. That is the quantum nexus. That is what I think David Bohm, the American physicist, would call the implicate order, or the implicate reality. That is the real, the objective reality. And the subjective reality is the interface that we have, that we're doing right now. Although parts of us...
Which is based on perception. The objective reality isn't as defined in this way as we see it.
Yeah. Even though we're touching, as we're talking, we're connecting on different levels at the same time. So, and that's when people are open and talking honestly with each other, that's what happens. When we're playing a role, strictly a role, like a business role in a meeting or something, it's very subjective. And if you have some creative thinker in there who's connecting with somebody, it's kind of a rarity sometimes, and oftentimes met with resistance, at least in organizations that tend to be kind of protective. Every organization I've been in, it's been, well, like when I worked as a defense contractor, some friends of mine who were computer scientists, and I was just a guy who wanted to figure out a better way to do something, didn't know the language, so I had to learn, and this was back in the 80s. We came up with a system that helped defense contracting for Boeing, to figure out how to manage what they called progress payments, or, for a contract, for a government contract. And we figured it out, early days of computers, right? And Boeing took it, and then they gave us each a certificate, And I was thinking, the computer scientist guy was like, "Man, we just gave them. I mean, this is worth millions. What we just did." And I go, "Yeah, I think you're right." And he goes, "Man," and we got this, and it was like on that carbon paper stuff, like, you have done a good job providing Boeing with it, that will be a cost savings for the company. And then it was like in triplicate, with like you could like tear off the front one. And I still have it somewhere. But organizations are either going to grab it from creative people, or they'll just not listen to you. And if they do listen to you, sometimes people are very lucky and they'll move up the ranks. But at a certain point, you have to play the game. And then it drives the creativity out of you. Whereas coalitions, where like-minded people come together with no timeline and no, a specific goal in mind, they can do amazing things because they're not limited. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. But
so, that's fine. So, do you get the sense that there is a system, a defined system behind this quantum nexus that we're interacting with?
Kind of like a simulation kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I do get that feeling. I think that's part of it. And I think the Native American way of looking at it, because oftentimes I lean on Native Americans, because I have had miraculous encounters with Native Americans. I've not only Anzar, but who kind of looks like a Native American, according to Lucy. That's how she describes him, which is kind of curious. Since I was a little boy, I had a really cool encounter at the Puyallup Fair, the Washington State Fair. I was wearing my, like the little kids in the 60s did, the little 6-shooters, had my cowboy hat, and I was acting like a fool, And this Native American guy in full regalia, he was part of the Wild West show. He came up to me, and he said, "Calm down." He said, and I was stomping around with my cowboy boots, and he's saying, "You need to learn to walk quietly and with purpose upon the earth." And then he left. That's all he said. I didn't ask him for advice or anything. The teacher appeared, and he was there. And then various times in my life, I got saved by an Inupiat man in Barrow, Alaska, who I met, this random guy who was on the shore where the ice comes up to the shore. I was like an idiot at midnight walking on the shore because it was light. And unbeknownst to me, there was a polar bear within 100 yards of me stalking me. And he said, "Hey, come up here." And I went up there, and his name was Willie. And he said, "Did you know what's on the other side of that ice floe right there?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "There's a polar bear there, and he was hunting you." And he saved my life. How, is it just another random Native American, or is it there's a specific reason for me meeting these people? So anyway, there have been lots of experience. And then I told you about Phil Red Eagle too. So,
yeah, I went to the Soul Foundation
Yeah.
conference, and within 2 days, I had 5 experiencers approach me at random.
Yep.
And just start talking to me about their stories.
Yep.
And at that time, I was just kind of learning about that world, and then met Lucinda, who was very credible immediately and told me things that I thought, you can't possibly know that.
She's amazing. Yeah, she is.
And then I had a lot of reason to believe and kind of open up to this. So I know what you mean, and I've told the audience about that. I said, well, okay, who knows? I mean, I just told you what happened. It seems weird to me, either way, whether you call it planned or deliberate or not. And from what we have talked about, it doesn't seem like something like that could be chalked up to coincidence.
No, I think there is. It's partly as I don't know where the quote came from, but if it was to me directly or I just learned it, that it's a combination of this simulation, things that are going on, but also our free will. And there's a constant dynamic between free will and this kind of, not fate, but this kind of simulation. And we're given latitude within that. And that's actually where I see the dynamic with NHIs and aliens going, is this not a battle in the sense that we think of a battle, but a deciding which way human beings should go. Control.
And we're involved in that decision.
Control.
Do you think you get that idea?
Yeah. Control or free will, and it goes back to the Greeks, Plato, who said that man cannot live without authority or freedom. It has to be a balance, and sometimes we get out of balance, and too much authority, you got a dictatorship. Too much freedom, you got anarchy, so
That's right.
It's like human beings need something. So,
and I compare that a little bit to artificial intelligence. Like, you have to give artificial intelligence guidelines, but the more randomness you introduce, the more virality it gets. So the more capable it gets of finding an insight that nobody else would have found, right? Or finding connection that nobody else would have found. And it would make a lot of sense that when we create an intelligence, it mirrors our own. So, yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. So Anzar has told you he's an ancient alien, right?
Yes.
And you've described him as the progenitor.
Yes.
Can you describe what that means?
Progenitor is the one who started things, started it off, the one who starts things, yeah.
Interesting. Now, you believe him that he's an ancient alien, or do you think that that is an interpretation?
I think that it is a simplified answer for me to understand initially. And now I have a more sophisticated understanding where, as he says, an aspect of, this is him talking, an aspect of me is an aspect of you. And an aspect of you is an aspect of me. So simultaneously, he exists in the past, the present, and the future. Because
and have something shared.
Yes.
In your energy.
And I learned about that shared energy because he talked to me about integration. And I mentioned it to my friend Lucy. And she said, "Whoa, integration, what are we talking about?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure. I need to." And she said, "Well, be careful because who you're integrating with." And so I did. I was very deliberate and very careful. And I didn't lose my sense of who I am,
So you've done the integration.
It's a process, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's where I have a more sophisticated understanding that that's where that's why my latest book was called "We Are the Aliens," because I really do believe that to be true. And so I think that just the way he said it, an aspect of you is an aspect of me. So we are connected. We are one family, and it's more of a family reunion than like these extraterrestrials that have had no contact with us. No, we are from the same source. That's my understanding. So it's a much more sophisticated understanding. My rudimentary understanding initially, ancient alien mystic. Well, that makes sense. Okay, he's a mystic. I'm going to listen to this guy. I'm going to hear what he has to say.
But didn't Anzar do to you what you're doing to the audience and what the government's sort of dripping out to us? He's saying, you can't really handle the truth. So let's call them extraterrestrials at first.
Yeah, let's call them an ancient alien mystic. Yeah, that's kind of what it is. And a funny story, I went outside. I like to go out at night and look at the stars like a lot of us do. And I look up there and I was saying, this was about 3 or 4 years ago, I said, you know what, I think I'm really starting to understand this stuff. And then I heard his voice. He has a very distinctive voice. He said, oh, you have no idea. He really put me in my place. It's like, okay, you think you understand, but you have no idea. You're like just starting out. You're like an amoeba, just, starting out. So, and then okay, yeah, you're right. I got to be open to it. I can't feel like, oh, I've learned it.
Right. If you had thought that at first, when he told you ancient aliens, oh, I'm starting to understand. Yeah. And now you're understanding the next, I like to say, layer of the onion.
Yeah. Who knows where it's going? I don't know. I really don't know. It's a great adventure. And I think Jeffrey Mishlove uses the term, he said, you're a psychonaut. Like an astronaut, but a psychonaut, which sounds kind of like you're a little bit crazy, but that's okay.
Oh no, it's a very common term.
Yeah.
But you might get confused with people who take DMT and salvia and,
right.
and
yeah.
something
Which
like that, or more artificial
means. He does talk to people about that, and he doesn't seem to be adverse to it. I don't feel a necessity to do that because I can get into this meditative state very easily. So why would I need any help? Plus, and I'm not condemning people who do it. If that's what they need to further their understanding, okay, just be careful who you're. So
you're in a hypnagogic state or hypnagogic state when you're in that state, right? So you're highly suggestible.
Yep.
And that's when the beings come in. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
So the Nazis had a heavy interest in paranormal and the occult. Can you talk a little bit about that as a history professor and Fulbright scholar?
Yeah, what sticks out in my mind that's very, very powerful at the foundation of all this, speaking of Adolf Hitler, was a quote from 1936 in Munich at a Nazi party rally. And he said, and I want to make sure I get the quote right, I go the way that Providence dictates with the assurance of a sleepwalker. And what that says is that he knew that he had a divine purpose, and he wanted to use that, the concept of providence, religion or belief, that he is being guided beyond what is just the normal everyday machinations of, politics or whatever. He wanted to be seen as something very, very special, guided by something special. That, of course, opens it up to using telepathy, telekinesis, using superhuman abilities, developing, UFOs, or I think the Germans developed like a anti-gravity thing called Die Glocke, that kind of thing. All these special projects, they were all driven by people with not just great imaginations, but something beyond that. It's something beyond that. It's
absolutely
what the creative people, I write and stuff, we call it the muse, but what is it really? It's really taking things out of the quantum nexus. And I think they were willing to do that, some of them more than others, and using some of the symbols from that. But they also used it very cleverly, more mundanely in some ways, politically as well, because they would use it in kind of a less than genuine way, just to like manipulate people as well. So it was obviously they weren't looking at, like we were talking about, the ethical and moral use of these powers or these abilities. They were looking for any advantage they could get, and they weren't thinking about the consequences.
Yes, political, military, all of it. And they saw the occult, UAP, the paranormal as a way to
Let's give it a shot.
More
Let's
power.
see if it'll give us a strategic advantage, which is exactly what...
Now, what you said about Hitler and his Messiah complex, that was both within him and reinforced in him by his underlings.
Oh, yeah.
Himmler, Hess, they all thought Hitler was the chosen one.
Yep.
And this was an occult idea.
Yeah.
This is idea of a sort of Teutonic Messiah.
Yep.
Was what they were saying. And it even began before Hitler, the concept of something like that coming from the occult.
Right.
And parafiction of the 19th century. And a lot of it had to do with underground. There were a lot of occultists, and then there was a lot of what they call parafiction, which they felt was inspired fiction. The first science fiction novel, by some people's standards, is Vril the Coming Race. And then the Nazis ended up creating this Vril society, and it was this mishmash. They definitely understood that UFOs were not coming from outer space. And I find that very interesting, because the outer space myth grew after World War II.
Right. Yeah, with the atomic bomb.
Right.
Yeah.
But as far as what you said about the political advantage of doing something like this and the societal advantage of doing something like this, what it eventually did, and maybe you can speak to more, is it gave the German lower class that was supporting the Nazi Party a divine purpose. And it gave them a reason to do things other than material wealth or self-gain.
Right. They felt that, well, it was something bigger than themselves. So it replaced, religion. And just to give you an idea, like posters in Nazi Germany in the late 1930s, early 1940s, they would show just a stark either picture of Hitler or just the Nazi flag, like 3 of them in a row, and that, black, white, and red, contrasting colors. And what it would say below was Nur Hitler. Nur meaning only Hitler. That was incredibly powerful propaganda. And of course, the nature of propaganda is to get you to believe something and then take action based on that belief. So the message is only Hitler. Well, do I matter? No, you don't matter. Only Hitler matters.
Yes.
Does God
This
matter?
was just a new religious message,
Yes.
wasn't it? I mean, it was only I can save you. I am sent here by divine forces to save you. And whatever you do for me shouldn't require you to get anything in return, because that's coming in the afterlife.
Right. Right. To set up that sacrifice. And the cool thing about all this, you can go back to the 1890s, 1880s. I think the airship thing that was going on here in America, these weird sightings of these like Jules Verne kind of airships that were landing in farmers' fields, and it's all over. You can go back in the newspapers and look at it, so it's documented. But earlier than that, if you go back to the spiritualism craze of the 1840s. With the Fox sisters, the knocking or rapping, and it spread like wildfire, and it spread to Europe too, including Germany, and this spiritualism.
And Austria.
Yeah, and Austria.
That's where Hitler encountered it. And there were already people taking these Teutonic myths and incorporating them into the occult, which is very common in the occult.
Yes.
It's you take things from different religions, you take things from different traditions, and you make it your own. That's encouraged.
Yeah.
So people were already doing that with Teutonic myth and the occult. And Hitler was reading that and collecting those magazines. And we know it. And we're going to get into that in future episodes. But I appreciate you setting this up with us a little bit from a historical perspective.
Yeah. And of course, Hitler was, Wagner fits into all that. Der Ring die Nibelungen, the whole Teutonic myth, Yeah. And speaking of, on a personal side, note here, my aunt, who was a real Nazi, she was in the Gestapo, during World War II, and was arrested and tried and imprisoned and actually sentenced to death for being a war criminal. She, I mean, it was a religion to her. To her, she was unrepentant as a Nazi. I mean, in her house, she had Nazi books with swastikas on it. It was very uncomfortable visiting her. And you never wanted to talk politics with her. She was the nicest lady, little old lady. She took care of stray cats and dogs. But man, you get her started on politics, and the next thing you know, you feel like there's going to be fire, torches, and swastika banners coming by. I mean,
Gosh, it was so deeply ingrained in them.
Yes.
And then when that coward Hitler was facing down Russia bearing on his bunker, he turns to the mic and tells everyone to kill themselves and burn everything down.
Sure. Because they're
he
not
couldn't
worthy.
Even face the Russian army himself.
They're not worthy of him. That's how he felt it was, Yeah.
We're going to dive more into where that piece of crap got those ideas in the next episode.
Yeah.
And for our regular listeners, I just want to mention that Bones was not here this time. We just couldn't work it out with schedules, but he'll be back in future episodes, and we'll be diving into it more. But while we have you here, Dr. Solheim, I wanted you to try to close some of this up for our listeners. When we began talking about UFOs. We began talking about their physical form. We began talking about how they take physical shape. We began talking about how people are affected medically, physically, when they come close to these objects. So we were talking about the physical effects that prove that the UFO phenomenon, the paranormal phenomenon, and greater phenomenon is real. The side that you're talking about is less physical, but I would say just as real. How do you marry those two things? How do you think they get married within the phenomenon?
It depends on what your exposure is, and a physicist will explain if you get beneath a UFO, UAP, and depending which way it's going, you're going to get a red shift or a blue shift. And I can never remember which is which, but one is bad and one is not so bad. And it's going to physically affect you, the radiation, the way it's going to impact your cellular structure. In my experience, talking earlier about my being saved from a child predator, yes, I was saved, and that's wonderful. But for 2 years afterwards, and I didn't tell you this part, for 2 years afterwards, I could barely speak. I was so traumatized by the experience of meeting this alien, who I now know as Anzar. Even though he saved me, trying to put it into perspective, it was so, and how close I came to being, taken advantage of. I had trouble speaking. I started stuttering. I wasn't stuttering. Yeah, I was traumatized. And I did some research on how kids develop stuttering. And one of them is traumatic experiences, which is what I was the case, for that, poster child for that. I had to go to speech therapy for 2 years. I got to the point it was so bad I didn't talk because I didn't want kids to make fun of me because, kids can be cruel. Maybe they don't mean to be, but, they are. So I just stopped talking. And when you learn to read, you have to read out loud, right? Well, I didn't want to do it because I stalled in my reading and everything was going downhill for me. But luckily they had the speech therapy. So for 2 years I had to go to speech therapy, and eventually I learned shortcuts. To this day, I'm a professor, so obviously I have to talk a lot. And it's still there. The impact of that, the stuttering is still there. But what I do, I've learned to do a quick jujitsu move. I don't counter it. If I encounter a sound or a vowel or whatever that I'm going to make that's going to get me hung up, I quickly dodge around it. Let it go by me. Don't try to meet it head on. Just go around it. Dodge around it. Like jujitsu, where you kind of take the power of the opponent and let him go by you. You recognize the power of it, but you just slide past it. And that's what I do. I quickly shift. That's taken years to try to figure that out. I've tried to explain it to students of mine who've had stuttering problems, that you can practice it and it can actually work. And you can be a public speaker. There was the famous country singer, Mel Tillis, I think was his name. He couldn't speak very well without stuttering, but he could sing. which is interesting. It's like, well, how can he
Yeah.
sing? But because he's got a flow going. He's going past it. He's flowing past it. He's not letting it hang him up. And but anyway, yeah, I was traumatized in that way.
Just a quick observation on that
Yep.
note. That was the first time you saw Anzar, correct?
As far as I can remember, I think he's been with me before that, but yeah.
Okay. And so the trauma began at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and then Anzar appeared to help you with the trauma.
Yeah.
And you said the trauma still exists today.
Yeah.
And you're still in touch with Anzar.
I think
so I find that potentially connected, yeah.
Yes, and it's also, the way I look at it, any kind of challenges like that will make you a stronger individual, because I very carefully pick my words. I try not to just spew something that is of no value or just sounds authentic but isn't. I think about it deeply, and I have to work very quickly to do that, because I'm also trying to dodge the troubled sounds, So,
Yeah.
and so that's made me a better speaker, I think a better teacher, because students, I think, sense that this person had difficulty. They can tell that I've it's very hard to, maybe right there you might have been able to tell a little bit, but they
not at all. If the audience heard me unedited, they would think that I have a spirit in my head or something.
But that's, it's like Franklin Roosevelt. He wouldn't have become president had he not gotten polio, because he was missing the common touch. The polio made him authentic. He wasn't just some rich mama's boy, which he even described himself as prior to the polio. He became a stronger person as a result, and could connect with people during a very dark time in our history. So,
well, it's always trauma.
Yep.
And these beings and these sorts of waves, or flaps, they call them in UFO world. Mm-hmm. So these waves of contact and UFO sightings, they happen around times of great turmoil and unease and uncertainty and anxiety. And that's a liminal state. Mm-hmm. That's a state when lots of things can happen, right? And that's a state where I think it ties into some of the things that we've talked about, where when Anzar says, I can't tell you exactly which future it'll be, but this is the most probable one. Mm-hmm. And so I think those moments where we're all in this liminal state, where they're not really sure which way we're going to go. Are we going to blow ourselves up, or are we going to survive? In which way? And so I think they show up around those times more, and we certainly can prove that throughout history. The 60s were such a heavy-duty time of paranormal contact and paranormal happenings. And of course, that was the time that you were around. Would you say that it compares the most to the modern time we're in?
I would say the divisiveness, definitely. Many parallels there to it. Maybe even approaching what it was like in the 1850s, which is just at the tail end of the spiritualist thing, where a lot of similar people looking for something beyond, what they've been given. And then you have this crisis where we're divided in two over some very, fundamental issues, not just...
And it's a dangerous time in terms of the fact that our beliefs are fractured.
Yes. And
so wildly fractured, and we're losing our shared reality between each other in terms of historical events happen, natural events happen, and people are interpreting them wildly different.
Yes, and it's very polemic. It's like you're either with me or against me kind of a thing. It's like, well, we can learn to disagree, right? No, you got to be with me or you're against me. There is no in between, and people stop listening and they stop learning when they don't seek out people who disagree with them, which I always encourage my students to do it. Don't always stay with the same crowd. Go find people that you wouldn't ordinarily agree with and just understand them better. And what you'll find is that you really share more in common with them than you think. And you can start to develop empathy and sympathy and for other people. And I think, that is probably the most important skill that we have is empathy, for other people.
Well, I think that's a fantastic way to close the show. Yeah. And that is something that I've heard from people at your level of psi ability, like Joe McMonagle, they've said the same thing, that when you're talking to someone else, they're giving you a glimpse of what their reality looks like behind their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Try not to judge too harshly.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Bruce. This was fantastic. Maybe we could do it again sometime.
Yeah.
And even dive further into some historical stuff.
Yeah.
Pick your brain.
Any time, Ram. I really appreciate it. Yeah. And I appreciate that we connected in the objective and subjective realities. So
I love that. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. And we'll be back very soon with another deep dive at Fortean Winds. Take care, y'all.